Welcome back. So when I was going to do this video, I had no idea of how busy tonight was, in a good way. There's some albums here that I have been heavily anticipating ever since they were announced. There are some albums that are going to be new experiences for me. There's four bats, and I'm also going back to an artist that I haven't listened to. Trying to remember when Turn Blue released. It's been a long time for the Black Keys for me. But we're going to start off with Lil Yachty. This is his kind of label mixtape, collaborative mixtape with Draft Day and a bunch of others. It is Concrete Boys with It's Us Volume 1. This is obviously their first project. Lil Yachty has been on a creative streak, both in the alternative kind of psych rock sound of Let's Start Here, but also with all of the singles of rap tracks. He has been doing incredibly well, diversifying himself in his career. So I'm really excited to see Lil Yachty kind of take more of an executive role. I know there's a couple more people on the Concrete Boys, but I'm interested to see where he is at when it comes to rapping, as well as the other artists. And I feel like Lil Yachty, out of so many people putting out these collaborative mixtapes, I feel like Lil Yachty does have a good ear for artists and a good ear for especially hip-hop artists. So I am quite excited for this. It probably won't be my first listen of the night because look at all of what I have to listen to. I had to literally use lines to make everything kind of distinct from each other. But it's still going to be a good listen nonetheless. So we have Bryson Tiller, and this is his self-titled album. The cover gives me Melt My Eyes kind of vibes. So the last album from Bryson Tiller was Anniversary, which I believe was the anniversary of the Trap Soul project that made him on the map, that made him incredibly popular, and it is still a great album. So it has a critic score of a 63 and a user score of 61. That's the Anniversary album. Kind of stereotypical, kind of just what I expect from Bryson Tiller on that album. I'm curious to see where Bryson goes on this project here, especially considering it's self-titled. Usually with self-titled for me, they usually kind of portrays that this album is going to be your most personal album or maybe most stripped back album. We're not sure of what that's going to lead to. I did hear one of the singles and it was interesting, but it didn't really gravitate or capture my attention. So I'm curious to see where Bryson Tiller goes because he was on such a high from Trap Soul. And then I believe it was True to Self or True to Myself. I forget what the name of that album is. But I remember it was a big commercial flop. But there was actually quite a bit of songs in there that I really liked. Like Before You Judge, Don't Get Too High. There's some good songs on there. But Bryson Tiller's kind of in this weird place of being still in the mainstream eye, but not being nearly as relevant as he used to be. So I'm really interested to see where it goes from here. So, the Black Keys with Ohio Players. So, I have not listened to a Black Keys album since Turn Blue. I'm going to say it was probably... Man, this has been a while, but I went to a Black Keys concert, and I believe it was in 2014. And I believe that's when Turn Blue released, if I'm not mistaken. So, it has been almost 10 years since I have listened to a Black Keys album. I believe I listened to a little bit of, I believe it's called Delta Cream. And it was okay, but I did not get through a whole album. So I am making it a mission to go through this album. So Ohio Players is the new album, and I'm seeing it is getting some very positive reviews, so I'm really curious about it. The last album was Dropout Boogie. Have not listened to a single note of this project, but it has a critic score of a 71 and a user score of a 62. I'm expecting just some really nice rock, maybe something a little bit safe, but who knows? Black Keys, I remember they did kind of separate for a little while, and then they returned with a couple other albums, including Dropout Boogie. So this could be a Death from Above 1979 situation, if you don't know what that band is. They separated for a very long time. They had an incredible album from 2004, and then they just completely separated, and then they dropped another album, I believe, was like in 2016 with The Physical World. And that album, while it was still good, was leading up to the steps of Outrageous Now, which is an incredible listen. I highly recommend it if you're looking for some really good punk and garage rock. So this could be the same scenario where Black Keys kind of separates for a bit. They put out a couple of albums to kind of establish their sound again, and hopefully with Ohio players, this could be the album that kind of makes that distinct sound that they were really good with El Camino and Brothers, where they can come back in full force. So I am quite interested to see how this album plays out. Mount Kimby with The Sunset Violent. So I have never listened to a Mount Kimby album. I listened to a couple of the singles, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was featured on Slow Tie's Tyrant, and there's a couple of features on this album from King Cruel, which I love that artist. So this is going to be a whole new experience for me. I have honestly no idea what the genre is. I'm just going to be really curious about it. The last album, it was Mark 3.5 Die Cuts. I don't know what that means, sorry. I didn't really do good in school. / City Planning, I'll do a slash. So it has a critic score of a 68, user score of a 67. I'm questioning if this album was kind of like a B-sides project, but this is what album of the year is giving me for an album. But I'm curious to see where this kind of goes. This will be a whole new experience for me. It is getting some positive reviews already, because obviously some people are already getting the album early, but I am excited for it. Now, this is the one that's going to generate probably the biggest conversation for me when I do the Aftermath video, and I honestly may do this EP all by itself, because Four Bats is dropping You Made a Star, which is an EP, right off the cusp of getting signed to, I believe, Drake and OVO Records. There is a heavy conversation as to, is Four Bats an industry plant? And he's only released maybe 2 or 3 songs, and he's already in conversations and doing collaborations with Drake and collaborations with Kanye West. There is something very interesting going on here, so I really want to see how this EP turns out. Obviously, this is his first full project. I did listen to, I forget the name of it, Act 1 or Act 2 or whatever it is. It's an okay song. It's definitely made for TikTok, in my opinion. Four Bats, I could say that he does have an interesting voice. He does have an interesting kind of look and, like, just kind of persona to him. So how he's going to do an EP is going to be interesting, especially off the cusp of being signed to OVO. I just know with OVO artists, they kind of get shafted many at the time. Besides P&D, G Jordan, there's Division as well. There's Roy Woods. These people used to be really big back then. They're still making music right now, but they have not near a shine as obviously Drake does. But we'll see how Four Bats turns out on this EP. Again, I'm going to be really interested in when this EP drops. I'm going to have such an interesting conversation. So we are getting now into probably 2 of the most excited albums for me that are dropping this year. So Vampire Weekend, Only God Was Above Us. I had no idea this was dropping this week. I thought it was dropping in mid-April. So I am such a huge fan of Vampire Weekend. And my first album experience with them was Modern Vampires of the City, which will get an all-time classics review at some point, especially with this album dropping. I feel like that may come sooner rather than later. So I have been listening to this band for a very, very, very long time, all the way back from college. And I've had so many great experiences with Modern Vampires. I remember listening to Contra on the way back from school, back to home. It was like a 3-hour drive, and I listened to that album maybe 2 or 3 times in a row. I had such an amazing experience with that project. I have it on vinyl. And the last album was Father of the Bride. So Father of the Bride for me was probably their weakest album. It was also their longest album. This was a double album, and kind of Vampire Weekend's albums fall into seasons, and Father of the Bride was considered the summer album. It is definitely the brightest sounding album that Vampire Weekend has released, and it's still a really good album. It's just a little bit too long, and again, it's just the ideas just kind of wear themselves thin on this record. But I will say that Harmony Hall was one of the songs I picked for the playlist of my wedding, funnily enough, with Father of the Bride. So I do have a really personal connection with that record, and the singles that I've heard from Only God Was Above Us sound fantastic. So I'm hoping this album goes back to the winter sound, which is the Modern Vampires of the City, something a little bit darker, something a little bit more gloomier, something a little bit more winter feeling. So, and not to mention too, we just had a massive snowstorm here, so it's going to be a perfect setting to listen to this. But my biggest album probably of this year This was the first album I ever did that I pre-saved it on Spotify. I was so excited. So Nova Amor with Collapse List. So Nova Amor, I discovered, I think it was probably about 2021. And I listened to, oh man, I forget the name of the album. I should have put it on here. But the album from 2020, I kind of discovered it through Spotify and I listened to a couple of tracks, which was Halloween. And I love that song. I would play it constantly. And as the years have gone on, I have listened to that album from 2020 so much that it's probably becoming one of my favorite albums of the decade. And I have grown to really like Novo Amor. And to put into a description of what Novo Amor is for me, it's kind of more of a Bon Iver, but kind of more traditional and a little bit more kind of to the point. It's nothing kind of abstract. It's nothing really experimental. But what Novo Amor does is he's incredible with his vocals. He's incredible with minimalism. And he's incredible of setting these amazing atmospheres and set pieces through his records. So the last album was Antarctic Dream Machine, which was the ambient record. So it was user score of a 71%. No one really kind of, I mean, people count this as a record from his. But that album from 2020 still carries so much for me. I'm trying to remember what the album is called from 2020. But in Aftermath, I will figure out the title of it because, again, give it a few years and that may become an all-time classics video for me. So I am really excited for Collapse List. The singles that I've heard from this thing have been some of my favorite singles of the past couple of years, especially Years On. I am so excited for these two records majorly. I'm probably going to listen to Vampire Weekend the first, Novo Amor second, and then we will kind of see where it goes from here. There's also, I know that Doja Cat's dropping the deluxe for Scarlet. There is so much dropping tonight, but I wanted to get this out of the way before we get into the madness, and it's probably going to be a few extra days to get the Aftermath video out, because man, I've got a lot to catch up on tonight. So here is all the albums that are dropping tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Go listen to some music, and we will talk again soon.